Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We have William Keyte here today talking to us about all aspects of the Constitution and some of the aspects of common law. Before we actually get going, before I hand over, I'm just going to bring you into the space with a short reading from Corinthians. It's one of our favorites, Corinthians 13. I'm sure you recognize it. It'll just remind us what we're all about. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. And we just say hello to Rachel here.
Right, and can we also get Joanne and Roger to mute themselves, please?
Yes, when we're not, if we, I'll just, so yes, when we're not talking, can you please stay on mute just so that we eliminate the background noise. Okay, so I've just read out Corinthians 13 to settle us into the zone. And now I'm going to hand over to William. Thank you, William.
Thank you very much, Lynn. It's a great pleasure to be here in this virtual space. It's good to see you guys. Just to add to the tech, if you, just to help with the recording as well, from the visual as to what will come out is once I really get started, because probably what I'm going to do is to just share my screen. I'm not going to present formally like full screen. I'm just going to share my screen, and I've got some slides which I'll make sort of fairly big, and I've got some notes underneath it just to remind me of some pointers and things like that. So in a very relaxed way, you'll see the slides, but sort of in the presentation edit mode kind of thing, and I'll just go down them. And really all that is just some pointers for me and a few visuals for you as well, because some of them are quite effective. At one point I will go to full screen because I've redone my my famous garden peas animation, which I did in 2018 at the presentation that I did for the Democrats and Veterans Party, which is really just an explanation of how trial by jury works. But I just like messing around with animation and things like that. It's just an excuse for me to play with the tech, isn't it, really? You know. So what I was going to say is just to not only mute, but also stop your screen once I really get started, because obviously if in the recording, it's going to capture my screen, but it's going to try and, you know, put in some other things around it. So when we get to that point, maybe just clear your camera as well. Might be an idea. It'll just make a better recording of it as well. So let's just try that now. Let me just see if I can share the screen, make sure that's all good.
So everybody, if Joanne, Roger, Carrie, etc., put your video off, please.
It's not allowing me to do it because of security, but it's all right. I'm just changing that setting now. I knew there was something, Lynn. I'm sorry. We'll get there. It's now asking me to quit Zoom. Oh, do you want me to just do that quickly? Maybe just 30, I'm hoping it'll be about 20 seconds.
Okay.
Let me just do that now, because I think I've just changed the setting and it now requires me to quit Zoom. So I will rejoin.
Okay.
20 seconds.
Right. We've also got, as William goes, Gary has said, what is prophecy but the self-fulfilling desire of our intent? And so when we think of what was coming through with what Lynn was reading, the self-fulfilling desire of our intent is we need to notice how we're feeling and what we're sort of giving out as to our intent of what we're doing. And the words that Lynn gave us, and really we're about totally unconditional love. And we know that the internet helps us to all get together, but also is very God-given and can give us challenges, and we are growing through it. So just let yourself grow, but also hopefully we'll get William back on. Anything else? And Joanne said that it was on UK Colin that she saw the three of us, so Rachel, Lynn and myself, because we did an interview on there, and William's coming back in. So I'm going to sort of oversee the chat, and if it feels right to, I'll put my hand up or something to say that we need to say something from there. Okay, so thank you.
Oh, look at that, it works. Lovely.
Is that all right?
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, I've got gallery view, so I don't particularly need people to turn their cameras off, but they can if they want to. Basically, the little profile picture, the pictures appear down the side of your presentation.
Yes, so they're probably appearing on top of the screen, aren't they, rather than actually as part of the recording?
Yeah, well, mine are going down the side, but I think you can change them to go across the top just by dragging it, if I remember rightly, but I don't intend to do that.
And the recording, where will the recording be available? Because Puddy's asked that.
I will put it in, well, I'm intending to put it in the Love Hearts channel. We can, if you want a recording, you can also ask me to email.
I can upload it to YouTube, Lynn.
Okay,
You can.
And is that for public availability?
I don't see why not. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we?
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so I'm assuming you can see everything there. It's just a screen of Keynote slides. And I'm just going to click down them. And whenever any notes come up at the bottom, it's just for me for reminders and things, important bits and pieces that I want to talk about. So, so I've entitled this. It sounds very formal, but it's not a talk as such. It's more of a, you know, we can break into discussion a little bit later. But if Lynn, if you're all right, I will sort of go into presentation mode. I wanted to present for about, you know, I'll try and keep it shorter than an hour and a half, actually, because that's quite a long time online. But if you're okay with that, I mean, it's about that much material. And there's a lot of stuff to get into, but
over to you. We're recording it, so if people need to leave, that's fine. Yeah,
fantastic. So I've called this "Why the Constitution Has to Be the Bedrock of Our Rule of Law." Okay, and you'll see as we get into the presentation, you'll see why there isn't really any other way that it can be, because the Constitution is very much in alignment with natural law and natural justice. And another term for that, And we'll get into this a little bit later. It'll become clear as to what that is if you're not familiar with the term natural law. Another term to use for that is universal law. And that is a law of dynamics that's built into the universe that simply governs the way that we interact with each other. It's the way that sentient beings interact with each other within the universe. And it governs principles like do no harm, cause no loss, act in honor. And how does it govern that? It does it really by throwing back at us consequences, which will be extremely negative consequences if we don't align ourselves with those absolute principles. And so the first thing that you'll probably notice with natural law, in just simply the things that I've explained so far, is that it's not a religion. It's actually something that is identifiable. It's something that's absolute. In fact, you could say it's a science. People who present deep information about natural law do call it a science. And we're getting into some very, very esoteric material. And what do I mean by esoteric? I mean material that's generally hidden from the masses. It's not accessible. And I would in fact go further and say that natural law is at the nucleus of the occulted body of knowledge. And what we mean by that is the body of knowledge that's deeply hidden and concealed from the large portion of the population of the planet. Okay, and yes, it's true to say that there have been people all through centuries, millennia, who have wanted the information that's contained within the occult, but not wish to share it with others. And so what that does is create a massive power differential over anyone who understands occulted information and over those that don't, who are not aware of it. And what would occulted knowledge be? It would be things like numerology. It would be things like deep information about human psychology and how the human psyche works. Natural law itself, alchemy. There's a huge number of subjects that we can go into that would be included within the body of occulted knowledge. And it's not something to be scared of. Occulted just means it's hidden. So rather than dismiss it straight away, what we should be doing is saying, well, why are they hiding it from us? That's the whole point, yeah? So one of the things I do say about the occulted body of knowledge is that the conspiracy theories that often people talk about are pretty lightweight compared with the body of occulted knowledge and natural law. So natural law is a subject that they really don't want you to know, really don't want you to know about. You know, they might be happy for you to know about, you know, the games that they played in geopolitics over the last few centuries and the wars that they've fomented by going into countries and manipulating the media behind the scenes or whatever it may be, how the pharmaceutical industry operates, stratospheric aerosol spraying, you know, whatever subject it takes your fancy and whatever interests you, yeah, that's probably pretty lightweight stuff compared with something like natural law. So natural law is absolutely paramount in importance, absolutely key, because it gets to the heart of things like consciousness, human consciousness, and law, and the philosophy of law, and what it is that how we obtain our rights and what would be considered obligations and responsibilities. Yeah, and it gets into things like consciousness. So natural law is not a term just to throw around. Yeah, you probably should get into it. It's not only fascinating, it is also absolute gold. It's just amazing information. So that's my little introduction there. And I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of where we were going with the sort of level of this stuff. Okay, so moving on, exploring the nature of liberty and what have we lost. So very quickly, I mean, you guys know very well that the whole nature, of course, of what we've lost. Our immediate concerns, if you like, is the fact that we have lost our liberties, or we are in the process of further losing our liberties. This is all about what we would consider our freedoms. And we've done this through largely this has happened through invasive legislation, or it's happening at the moment through invasive legislation. And we can draw an important conclusion from this, which is that the most dangerous adversary to the people is often its own government. And if we look through history, in fact, I'm just going to make these slightly bigger, actually. Let's just get rid of that. There we go. That's a bit better, isn't it? Usually through history, if we look at societies, you'll know and you'll discover very quickly that largely the most dangerous thing for the people of a nation is in fact its own government. And so the nature of the government and the nature of the relationship of the government to the people is absolutely key. And that's one of the reasons why I go into constitutional law. And it's also why I'm astounded that other people don't, particularly, because the whole point of the Constitution is that it defines the relationship between the people and its governing administration. Yeah, it's all about really, well, what actually can your governing administration do? What can it do legitimately, and what can't it do? Yeah, so you would have thought that the freedom movement would be all over this topic, but for some reason it isn't, and that's one of the biggest problems. So loss of liberty, continuing with that, you can see that just a little graphic there. It's occurred gradually. We kind of know that. Let's not think for a moment that it's occurred over the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's nothing like that. It's not even decades. It's centuries. And you could, on a grand scale within the world, you could say that that's probably across millennia as well. Although we've seen cycles, we've seen great periods within our history and in our very, very ancient history where things might have been very different. And there have been other times when it's been shockingly bad news for the mass of people. So gain of government control has been incremental over centuries. Now, why do I say government control? Because our loss of freedoms is largely down to one key thing. And really, it's the nature of government. Yeah, because other things you can deal with to an extent. Yeah, but if you have your own government being that danger to your liberties, you've got a real problem on your hands. Yeah, so that's why I'm saying that. The boiling frog principle, which you all are familiar with, I'm sure, which is that the people won't notice over time if it's just done incrementally. Yeah, and it's absolutely the case that has happened. Yeah, the people can give an inch and not really mind too much. And, you know, as you'll see later as we get into this, we're going to get into this whole idea of how we're quite good as people, as human beings are quite good at sort of living, let live. Yeah. And the trouble is that they confuse living, let live with just being too conciliatory and not placing boundaries. Yes. And the universe actually requires us not to be like that. Okay, it wants us to recognize individual rights because individual rights is recognized within the universe or by the universe. Yes, the universe wants us to understand individual rights, and we'll get onto that. So continuing on how we've lost our liberty, and this is really key, and Lynn and I were talking about this at the beginning, before you guys came on, actually. And you can see that I've put a few things here. So systematizing aspects of our lives. Yeah, so we like systems sometimes because it gives us a kind of an efficiency. And government that runs things loves systems. And you'll notice that most of our lives at the moment, and society generally, is all about systematizing things because they like modeling, they like algorithmic thinking, they love modeling. They like to take any situation and then model it for the future. Yeah, so that's a thing that we recognize. Compartmentalization. Okay, so there's no holistic thinking. So we get this kind of thing all the time. And what does that lead to? It leads to a kind of loss of responsibilities across departments of government or across a company or whatever it is, meaning that you don't get any redress when there's a problem because all that's happening is that certain people are boxed in or compartmentalized into that area of responsibility. And to make life easy for them, they just say, no, that's just you just worry about those things. Yeah. But actually real problems, organic problems, are often spanning that area and across into other compartments as well. And as soon as you get that sort of problem, it all breaks down, because people on the phone where you're trying to deal with something will just say, well, that's not really my area of concern, so I'll have to pass you on to somebody else. And then we just get a complete loss of everything, falls apart and we can't deal with it. And that seems to be happening more and more, not less, but more. Okay, the more you systematize things and the more you centralize things, the more of a problem that becomes. And at the bottom, you can see there, I've sort of turned that into a kind of a manifestation of that, an expression is, my job is only to fill the vaccine vials. Okay, I'm not allowing my responsibility to go any further than that. Yeah, so big problem, really serious problem there. Okay, so we're ultimately talking about excuses for not taking responsibility. Yes, and this is part of the invasive lying that goes on within society. Okay, and this is becoming a theme generally of what I'm talking about more and more. Okay, people sort of know me for constitutional law, and constitutional law, as you'll see as we get into this topic, into this presentation, is really very surface. It's a surface solution, and you'll see why it's a surface solution. But it still requires some much deeper understanding of things that are beneath that. And those are the areas that I'm much more about now. I'm much more about looking at the relationship of that we have as human beings with lies and truth, because that really what that is consciousness. Yeah, people throw around the word consciousness. We want to live in a conscious society. What does that mean? When you actually challenge people on that, they don't have a clue what to say. Okay, what does conscious behavior? Okay, conscious behavior means it's behavior that you recognize in yourself. Unconscious behavior is behavior that you're not aware of, that you are exhibiting. And we're going to get into that a little bit later on, okay? But because largely what's happening is that we are lying to ourselves and gaslighting ourselves about practically everything. And that includes people in the freedom movement, by the way. Okay, so some of this information is quite uncomfortable, all right, but you'll see where I'm going with it. Anything I need to talk about down here? No, just leading to a sense of futility. No point in resisting or calling things out. You don't get anywhere. You can't speak to anyone who's going to help you with the problems. Artificial intelligence processes also adding to that. Modeling, yes, Professor Neil Cox is an interesting man on this. All models are wrong, but some are useful. Okay, that's a good quote, and I was pushed in the direction of that by somebody at my last talk, actually, somebody in the audience who told me about Professor Neil Cox. But I thought that was very interesting because the government loves modeling. We just talked about that just now. So let's just take that a little bit further. We're still talking about how we've lost our liberties. We do it through outsourcing enormous portions of our lives. Okay, we outsource our children's education. We don't take personal responsibility, most of us, for our children's education. Although Lynn and I were having a nice chat about home educating just before we started. And for good reason. Many people are not in a position to be doing that, understandably. But we are in the position that we're in because of hundreds of years of kind of gaslighting ourselves and making ourselves believe and telling ourselves the story that actually educating our children requires expertise. No, it doesn't. All it requires is an enthusiastic, kind facilitating of the love of learning, which is a very different thing entirely. You don't teach somebody, you allow them to learn. You create a groundwork where they just love learning and love reading, and so that's one of the aspects. We've also outsourced, as you can see in my notes at the bottom there, the care of our elderly. Yeah, that's a massive problem. Yeah, and look what it caused, because we push our elderly out into sort of specialist places that can deal with what it is to be old, right? Okay, and that, but really, in our traditional communities, in the village, if you like, they would be with us all the time. And they would be imparting their wisdom and their knowledge onto our children and us, and helping us when we need it. Yeah. And it's shocking, absolutely terrible. And then what happened? It caused them to be segregated, right? And it happened over COVID, and we couldn't get to them. Okay, so this is how natural law throws back karmic consequence to us. Okay, so that is where we take actions that are out of alignment with natural law, and we end up with very real, identifiable consequences, really nasty, serious consequences. And that happens both above and below. It's one of the Hermetic principles, as above, so below. What do I mean by that? I mean, it happens at the individuated level within us, in the actions that we take individually, but it also happens at the collective level in society as well. So at the collective level, we are suffering under a whole range of collective lies about things, because we've gaslit ourselves, we've talked ourselves into believing certain things, yeah, which are just illusions, really. Okay, so the consensus thinking is actually not truth. Consensus thinking is merely what the majority think, yeah, and that isn't the same thing as truth. Okay, so we are suffering under illusions, massive illusions in society, and those are the collective lies. So we tell collective lies, and it means that when you take action from the point of a lie, what actually happens is that you're getting yourself into a right pickle, because you're taking action from a place where you think you are when in fact you're not. It's like being on a map, okay, and you think you're there in point A on a map, but you're actually right over here, and you start navigating and going off in where you think you're going when in fact you're not. You're actually somewhere completely different, and you're in a whole load of mess. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is to show you why it is at a deeper level, using natural law concepts and ideas, why it is for real we are in the situation that we're in. Okay, it's not just because, and this is a get out clause, they are a bunch of conspiracists. So we need to get out of this mindset a bit, quite a lot actually, that everything that we are experiencing in the way of an enslavement, because it is largely, it's a kind of enslavement, is all because of them. It's not. It's actually a resonance. It's partly them, but there aren't actually that many of them. Okay, the biggest thing that probably has caused it is us resonating with that, and us being in the kind of screwed up state of consciousness and the mental condition that we are largely in society. I know that's a big claim at this point, but believe me, and I haven't got time to go through it in this presentation, but I could take you through far more material that would get you into showing you the nature of lying, and how micro lies, which is just the little lies that we tell ourselves, grow into the most colossal, whopping lies, not only with ourselves, but at the collective level. Okay, and you can demonstrate how that actually happens, and it's fascinating. I'll shut up because that's one of my rants. Okay, centralization we talked about, and what does it do? It's about distancing the point of control from us, so that we have no overview and no pattern to recognize. Okay, so when people clamor, for example, for let's get into the European Union, let's have governance from Europe. Okay, and then what would be the next stage following that? Global governance. It's just more distancing. Yeah, and I would probably argue, in fact, that a proper system of common law governance operating would not be able to operate correctly in a modern, sophisticated, centralized nation that we have now. So what would that necessitate? It would necessitate the falling apart of our nation into smaller cells, because as is often witnessed in nature and in sacred geometry, you'll find that when organisms and structures form, there's a point at which they can't go any further, and they simply break apart and become more objects. Yeah. And I would argue that actually a community, which is really what our society is, it's just a very large, sophisticated community, is too large to maintain under proper natural law functioning, under natural justice. Doesn't work, because you have to have observation of the way things are running. Yeah, probably you want to only be maybe a couple of steps away. So, you know, when you go and I don't know, yeah, when you're educating your child, you might outsource something because you're not an expert, you don't feel that you're good enough at it, but you need to know the person who's you know, somebody might recommend it to you, but then they know the person who's actually going to be doing it. You know, you get what I mean. So whatever service it is that you're wanting, or whatever point of control it is, it must not be more than sort of, you know, 2 or 3 steps away or something like that. Maybe. Come to believe that centralization is more efficient. And if you've been in IT at all, or you've built any kind of systems like databases like I have, it's certainly true. It's great if you design systems in such a way that there's a central point of failure or a central point of control, or the piece of data within the database is only once in the database, and all the other places where it's seen from is looking at that one place. It means that you only have to change it in one place. Fantastic. It's a simple principle that in systems, yeah, you do want that centralization, and that's why government wants it. It's not always that all the people in government want they want centralized control because they want control over the freedom-loving, crazy conspiracy theorists. No, really, it's just a reflection of people in the system who are just like us, really, or not like us, but like the people around us, our family and our friends who perhaps don't really get it like us.
Okay, has anyone else lost William?
Control to come and take it. Have you lost me?
I lost you a minute there. Yeah, we've got a little bit of glitching going on here, which is a bit surprising, but I suppose it's that sort of meeting, isn't it?
Interesting.
Sort of meeting where
That might tell us something.
yes. Sometimes
are you still seeing me now?
I've got you now. Yeah, you just went quiet for a bit, so if you could just repeat that last little section. I think we used to get this sometimes on when we were doing meetings with Freedom Alliance, and used to just break up a little bit.
They might be interested. They might learn something, actually. You know, GCHQ might be in on this, and
yeah, I hope so.
they could learn something from that. So just to wind back very quickly, we're talking about, you know, the control vacuum. It's a sort of a tacit invitation to those that like control to actually come and take it. Yeah. So when we do outsource and we're happy for that convenience, which is really what it's all about, isn't it? It's a bit of laziness, a bit of convenience. They're going to love that. They're going to just come straight in and just take that control, because that's what they're all about. You know, we're giving them the excuse to do it. Yeah. So what we're not doing is providing those boundaries. Yeah. It's boundary setting. We haven't been doing that. And that's also part of our messed up psyche as well, by the way. And there's some really deep subjects that I could go into there to do with containment and boundary setting, and how the masculine is not being expressed as it should be within society. But that's a whole other story. They also like to bring it on deliberately. Yeah. And you know that it's problem, reaction, solution. They generate a risk or a concern or a worry about something, a panic, knowing that we're going to come running back to them because we can't remain calm and centered. So we come running back to them for a solution. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that's going on. I've got litigation there. Why have I got that? Oh, it's because that's another reason. That's another problem. You know, companies try to protect themselves from litigation. So a good example of that, by the way, would be I don't know whether you've seen it, but you know, shopkeepers are actually encouraging shops, I should say, business owners of shops are actually encouraging their shopkeeping staff not to go after shoplifters, because if they were to be injured in doing it, then the shopkeeping staff might then come after the company for damages, etc. I mean, just mad kind of stuff. And this has been going on for years, this kind of thing, but you get what I mean. Yeah. So there's a little bit of this sort of, you know, there should be a law against that kind of thing. Really not good. You know, somebody gave me a really good example the other day. You know, this path that I'm walking along in this park must be safe, because if it wasn't safe, somebody would have put a handrail there for me. You know, this is the kind of thinking that is riddled through society. Not taking responsibility, right? So that's the place we're in. So let me just play you this clip. I don't know whether you'll be able to hear the sound. You should be able to. Tell me if you can. But this is a dear old Jordan Peterson, but he absolutely just nailed it. And I'm hoping you'll be able to hear this. It's only 1 minute, and I want you to, it's about 50 seconds actually. I want you to hear it.
Like, it's a misapprehension. We like to
It's not playing.
principle of governance,
There
and
it is.
everyone who lies.
It's not playing. Can you hear that? Sorry, Lynn.
We heard a little bit of it, but it was freezing up.
Not working. Let me just try once more, and if it not, I'll just move on. It's a real shame if it doesn't, because it's just phenomenal. Let me just try once more.
100% of the time. And so, and sometimes that lie is just silence.
Not doing it. Forget it. I'll move on. What I have done actually is this comes from an interview. Oh, he's playing again. Hang on, let me just stop it. This comes from an interview that I've put up on my website, which I'll tell you at the end. You must watch. It's about an hour and a half long, but I really urge you to watch it, because what it is all about. I mean, that 50 seconds. Let me just praise it for you. What he basically said was essentially that a tyranny is not held in place by your tyrannical leader, you know, whether it's Mao or Hitler or whoever it may be. It's not them that's doing it. What is it that's holding the tyranny in place? It's the lie. And everybody within the system, inside the system and outside the system, that is contributing to that lie by maintaining it through their false belief system. Okay, so that it was just a really good summary, a précis on that. But that's essentially what he's saying, is that that's how a tyranny is kept in place. It's by the lie. Right, moving on. So what is the surface solution to this? And I say the surface solution because it's not the be-all and end-all, I'm afraid. The surface solution is our democratic common law constitution. And if you're not familiar with how this is supposed to work, I'm going to break it down for you now. I'm going to give you the lowdown on how our English constitution was supposed to work. How do I know this? Just some research. It's really pretty obvious. And in fact, if you look at the academic sources and you look at great people through the history of law, they've said it quite clearly. It's really quite obvious. It's in hundreds of quotations of key people. Hallam, Crabbe, Blackstone, you name it. Geoffrey Gilbert, historians, and people in law as well. Okay. Now I'm going to break down for you how it's supposed to work. Now, I don't only know this because of research. I also know it because of logic, because it cannot be any other way. And you would not have had invented a mechanism called trial by jury unless the people of the jury were meant to be the judges. What the hell would you have it there for? Okay. So I'm going to go through this now. Some of you will have heard this and you will have heard me talking about it, but I'm just going to break it down for you now. Now, it's really important that you understand that this was designed for a conscious society that, at least to some extent, is capable of holding it in place. So do we have a conscious society now? No. How do we know that? Because our rule of law is absolutely dominated by legislation. And I'll come on to explain why that, not just why it is, but why that's an indication of a failing society. Okay. So it's designed for a conscious society. That means that we can't just magically put it in place and expect everything to just fall into place. It's going to be a massive battle. And the only way that we're going to be able to do it, first of all, once we understand how it's supposed to work, is to start getting righteously angry about it in large enough numbers. Because if you don't get righteously angry about it enough, and you don't talk about it all the time, then you don't really care enough. It's as simple as that. Okay, Mark Passio, who's one of the greatest speakers on natural law, I think, says it like this. He says he adds an eighth principle to the list of 7 hermetic principles, which is part of the occulted knowledge, but he adds his own as the 8th. Okay, and it goes like this: what do you care enough in the world about to put your will behind? So an indication of what you give a damn enough about, okay, is what you're taking action over. Okay, because the 3 pillars of consciousness are thoughts, feelings, and actions, and they have to be in alignment. Again, it's all part of the occulted knowledge: thoughts, feelings, and actions. Okay, and the action part of it is what you feel in the stomach, in the abdomen. Okay, that's where you feel the action. It's that feeling that you get when, right, I've had enough of this, and I'm going to stand up. Okay, that's where you feel it. That's where you feel action. Okay, so unless you're taking action on this, an action could be reading, it could be presenting, it could be telling other people about it, passionately about it. Yeah, and it could be doing other things like conversing with your government about it and informing them of what their obligations are and responsibilities. It could be all kinds of things. So some initial questions quickly. What is it to govern? Okay, to govern is really to decide on matters of justice. It's not really to decide on matters of policy, of how something runs. We'd like everybody, please, to have a fishing license to fish in this river. That's not governing. Okay, that's just meddling, and it's just interference. Okay, so governing really is actually about justice. So when we talk about to govern, that's what we're really talking about. Okay, and government, the administrative government, it's not their business to be governing the country, as you'll see. And it's not their business, by the way, to be meddling around with policy either, because that wasn't the original intention of a governing administration. Okay. What is a constitution? A constitution is the thing that describes the relationship between the broad mass of the people and the governing administration. And it's, I suppose you could generally say, it's the sort of governing principles of the nation generally. Yeah, it's the principles on which we stand, on which the nation is founded. Yeah, what are its most core customs and beliefs? Yeah, that's what a constitution is. Okay. Third thing there, are all constitutions good for the people? No. Because a constitution that doesn't place the people in authority over its own governing administration isn't any good at all. Why? Because it's ultimately going to lead to tyranny. Because the most dangerous thing about a government is that it can be infiltrated by powerful interests. And I think we know that it is, generally. There are either very selfish people who work within government. There are some very good people, by the way, that work in government. Let's just be clear about that too. There are some really good people who care about our society. And the freedom movement's very good at forgetting that, actually, which is one of the reasons why we have to reach out to the people in the system. Okay. But because government has a particular position here, it's very tempting for people who want power to infiltrate government and take it over from within. It's vulnerable to that. Therefore, the Constitution is quite important, because the whole point of the Constitution is that if the governing administration is going to be limited in some way in its powers, fundamentally, then it's the Constitution that's going to define how those limitations work. In other words, what it's basically doing is saying, how far can the government go? So the first question that you can ask anyone in the governing administration is, well, do you think that legitimately you can do anything you like? Did you notice that I used the word legitimately? Okay, because you could ask the question, can you do anything you like? And the answer to that, probably by, you know, a lot of people in the political class is, well, yeah, we can, because we're getting away with it. Why? Because you guys don't understand what we're doing. You don't know the Constitution. You don't understand the law that places those limitations over us. They're not going to say that, obviously, but that's what they'll be thinking. Okay, so in answer to the question, can you do anything you like? They'd be saying, yeah, we can. We've just proved it with COVID. It's just, you know. But the key question is, can you do anything you like legitimately and lawfully? That's the point. And the answer in this country, because of the nature of our constitution, is no, they can't. So how do we know that? So we then have to examine the Constitution and understand the nature of the Constitution. It's a little bit about its history and where it's defined. Okay. Now, the last place the Constitution was actually defined clearly was in the Magna Carta 1215, the original Magna Carta, which isn't statutory law. Okay. Have to be careful about using the word law in that case, as people get very flustered about the use of the word law, okay, in this situation. But statute, which is really legislation, is what the government has the power to create. Okay, but if we're saying that the government is bound and limited in its powers, then there must be some other kind of law, as I've already said, constitutional law, that must sit higher than legislation. Okay, and indeed that is correct. Okay, so it wouldn't make any sense, and I'm going to come on to this later on, for the legislative branch of government, which only has the power to create statute, to be able to alter the governing framework, or the constitutional framework in which they sit. Because if you could do that, they could change anything. They can change the constitutional limitations that are placed on them. Logically, it doesn't make any sense at all. And it couldn't possibly be the case. And it isn't the case. And in fact, actually, 30 years ago, you'll remember sort of, you know, back in the day with politicians like, Douglas Hurd and Margaret Thatcher and, you know, all of that crowd. They're just that sort of generation that I remember, you know. But the one thing I would say about them is that they may have been just as conniving as the ones that are in office now. But they, I think, were much more capable. And one of the indications of that is that when they were asked questions like, can government legitimately do anything it likes, they knew they wouldn't be able to get away with that. Which is why 30 years ago, they would actually admit, no, of course not. Of course we can't. Yeah, we're bound under constitutional law. Yeah, so 30, 40 years ago, they were saying that. Politicians were actually coming out and admitting that because they knew they couldn't get away with it. Okay, they're not doing that now. It's in fact, it's far worse, because on the parliamentary website, they're actually saying out in text, Parliament is sovereign. And it's completely incorrect. It's absolutely wayward. And the more you get into constitutional law, the more inane you realize that claim is. And in fact, Martin Geddes, I think, actually did challenge them on that, and it was quite interesting. But anyway. So Magna Carta 1215 was the last declaration of our already existing constitution. You notice I said that already existing constitution. The constitution didn't begin with Magna Carta. Okay, it was already in place prior to that. Okay, it's just that Magna Carta was it was effectively marking a point of in fact what it was King John's trial by jury. It was the convening of a trial by jury of his peers, the peers of the realm, to try him for his crimes. Okay, why was he committing crimes? Because he was he was actually acting violently and doing all sorts of nasty stuff. But he was actually breaking the principles of his coronation oath that he had already taken. Okay, so it was quite right that he was under duress. So that's one of the claims that we get thrown at Magna Carta all the time is, oh, no, because King John was under duress. He can't, yeah, of course he was under duress. Absolutely right was he under duress. So what exists within the 1215 Magna Carta? Okay, a whole load of weird stuff as well, by the way. Okay, but contained within 1215 Magna Carta are some absolutely key constitutional principles. Okay, so some of the chapters of the 1215 Magna Carta are what we call the Articles of Common Law, which are the central principles of constitutional governance. Okay, so common law, there's that word. Okay, now most of the places within the freedom movement that the term common law is used in association with things that, as far as I'm aware, increasingly coming to the conclusion that it's absolute garbage. Okay, most of the time common law is used incorrectly in association with things that aren't common law at all. Okay, so the most important thing that you guys can remember, you should remember, is that common law is constitutional law. It is the Constitution. It's the law that underpins our Constitution. Therefore, it's official. It's the bedrock of our system, of our existing official system of law. And it was set up correctly. Okay, a little bit about crime. So true crime requires an injured party who has been hurt in some way, or, this is important because it's often missed by the freedom movement generally, or an attempt was made. Okay, so a crime is where some hurt is being done to a man or a woman. Okay, and an attempt is being made even if they didn't succeed. Okay, so what defines right behavior? So I'm skipping a little bit here, and I'm going over a number of concepts, but you can arrive very quickly understanding that right behavior, which is where, by the way, you get your rights from, is do no harm, cause no loss, and act in honor. Okay, that's not a quotation. It's not something that's absolutely rock solid. It's just a general principle a lot of people kind of regurgitate, and it's good. It gives you good indication. There's something missing from that, though, by the way, which I will come on to later. Okay, because it's one of the subtleties that people miss. But basically, do no harm, cause no loss, and act in honor. Okay. Now, mens rea is often equated to malice or malicious intent. It's actually not quite accurate. I need to change that. It's basically intent only by itself, actually. Mens rea in Latin is what we call it. It's gone through different meanings and changes in old history, going back a bit. But that's what a jury is looking for when they're trying to discover a crime, is that you have to find mens rea. Okay. And at the bottom there, you can see I've said grey areas of mens rea. That's fine. Moving on. So Judicial Emporium, trial by jury. So that's what we call it in Latin. Judicial Emporium, or common law trial by jury, is the absolute central principle of our constitution. Why? It's not only defensive, it's also offensive as well for the people. Now, isn't this what we have now? No, it's not. Okay, so the trial by jury that we have in place at the moment is a very watered down, feeble variety, if you like, of the real thing, compared with the real thing. It's not to say that there aren't good things happening when you do get a trial by jury, by the way, in the current system, because the legal profession, contrary to many people in the freedom movement, actually love trial by jury, generally speaking. They actually think a lot of it, and members of the judiciary as well. Okay, so that's something just to be aware of, because that's a bit of a surprise for people generally. But it is a very watered down version of trial by jury, and we'll come on to why that is. I'm going to speed up a little bit now. So what is the real version of trial by jury is meant to have a convener rather than a judge. That's somebody who brings the proceedings together. The real judges are actually the jury. And therefore, the convener, which has now become the judge in our distorted version of trial by jury, now gives directions to the jury. And the jury willingly accepts those directions because they don't know any different. Okay, and that's because they're not told of the power that they have. Okay, we'll come on to what that power is. the aspects of a case that require judgment. So the aspects of the case that require judgment are the facts of the case, the law, the admissibility of evidence, and the punishment. Okay, and that, all four of those should be judged by the jury. At the moment, it's not considered like that. It's considered that the judge just decides on law and the jury decides on facts. It's not how it should be. Jury independence and annulment. Okay, in a very general sense, we call this jury independence. And what does that mean? It means that the jury has an independent decision on whether they can give a guilty or not guilty verdict to the defendant. Okay, regardless of what has technically happened with the legislation. Okay, so if the defendant has clearly, in the facts of the case, breached the legislation, there's nothing to stop the jury from deciding, no, this is going to be a not guilty verdict. Why? Because there's something about it that doesn't feel right, doesn't feel just, maybe. There's something that we don't like about it, or one of, a certain number or one of the jurors doesn't feel that it's right. Now that can, but doesn't always, lead to what's called an annulment, which means that just simply in that case, it means that that piece of legislation has been ignored. Okay, annulment by jury occurs just in that case, but you can't always tell whether in fact it is an annulment. It's not always easy to tell. And the reason why is because you don't necessarily know the reasons for the juror's decision. Rightly so. Okay, so sometimes it leads to an annulment, but sometimes it doesn't. Doesn't really matter. The most important thing is that the jury has an independent decision. That's what we're talking about, really. Okay. Majority verdict and unanimity. Okay, there is no such thing under common law. Under a proper common law trial by jury, there's no such thing as majority verdict. Okay, and what that means, basically, is that in order for the defendant to be found guilty, it has to be unanimous. So conversely, that means that you could have one member of the jury dissenting and deciding that the individual is not guilty, and that would return under common law a not guilty verdict. And that is all to do with reasonable doubt, by the way. It's to do with the principle under common law that we have to be careful. Okay, because common law is fundamentally careful. Okay, and that's a principle of natural law and to do with boundary conditions. And I could go into that, but I haven't got time now. Okay, I'll just play this. I'll just do this full screen because you might like this. But this is what I've just redid it, actually. But I put this together originally in 2018, and it was in one of my original videos, and everybody sort of thought it was very exciting. So let me just talk you through this. I'm going to play this now. I'm assuming you can still see that. So what you're seeing here is my garden peas. Actually, that represents the community. They're just people. And somebody we think might have committed a crime, but they haven't. We don't know that yet. Okay, but they've been a bit naughty in some way, and we have to then pull them into a trial by jury. Okay, they are the accused. Okay, but they might still be not guilty. They might be able to go free at this stage. We don't know that for sure until they've had a trial by jury. Okay. So what happens then is that we have we select 12 randomly selected people from our community, and as you know, they become the jury, and they are the judges in a proper common law trial by jury. We then elect one further, so we have an election, and elections are fine, by the way, for personnel. You don't have elections to determine policy. So we can come on to that later. That's where the political system has gone wrong. Okay, elections are fine, and they are a principle of democracy, but a fairly minor characteristic of democracy, and it's only for electing people. Okay, so here is somebody else who's been elected. What do they become? They become the convener. Okay, and it's probably the case, and it would have been the case, that conveners would have known quite a lot about law and about justice, and could have provided some very good and very useful advice to the jury if they wanted it. And they can take it. They can take that advice if they want to. It's not directed at them. Okay. So moving on, I just come out of that. I just thought I'd do that because that's just a little bit of fun with animation. So legislation. The legislature and legislation and statute. We've already said that there is a branch of the administrative government that is called the legislature. And even under the Constitution, it's meant to be there. It is expected to be there because there are reasons for having legislation there as a kind of safety net for flagging up issues. Okay. Now, the key thing, though, about legislation under the Constitution is that it's not supposed to have the power to punish by itself. Okay. That's a really important thing. Okay. You don't get a punishment. You don't receive a punishment just because you breached a statute. So what does a statute do under the Constitution? What it does is flag you up as a potential problem and bring you before a court of your peers. That's what it's there for. Yeah. So examples of why you might need that: traffic, age of consent. There are all kinds of reasons actually why it's sensible to have some kind of legislation in place there. Okay, so I haven't got time to go into that too much yet, but I could do it, you know, on another occasion if you were wanting that more detailed information. So the danger of pure anarchy, okay, is taking the law into your own hands. Now, one of the claims that I come out with at the end of all of this, and I'll do it now, is that the constitutional law, what it actually does is it allows us to have something not quite anarchy, but something in between. Okay, the anarchists are people who believe in no governance at all, no government, no state, etc. And I'm actually very sympathetic towards that. Except that the problem is that taking the law into your own hands is dangerous. Why? Because we're imperfect and we make mistakes. So the point of having trial by jury or some kind of natural law tribunal where you go out to the community to judge you, you submit to the community in their judgment, is because under natural law that is ultimately how it has to operate. Because you can't be a danger to other people in your community. Okay, hence the need under universal law for trial by jury or some kind of natural law tribunal. Yeah, pure anarchy is dangerous, particularly when we're in a society where we're not conscious and we don't understand. Okay, that's why the constitutional law is so correct in what it's trying to do. And the other point to make at the bottom there is that statute was not new with the birth of Parliament, as is often misunderstood. Okay, so kings and queens were completely the government before we did this kind of creating these branches of government for a kind of perceived separation. It wasn't a magic solution at all. It's only window dressing, really. Okay, because ultimately the head of state is meant to be the government. Really, they're the head of the government. Okay, what they did was create a judiciary, create an executive, create a legislature, because it kind of distances and it delegates a bit. And then they talk about the separation of powers. So the legislature can't work with the judiciary, which can't work with, etc. Yeah, right. So really keep in mind that statute was able to be created prior to Parliament because the king would create statutes and did so. Yeah. Moving a bit faster, I've got to keep moving here. The head of state, what is the head of state? Well, in Britain, the head of state is the monarch, who is meant to be a wise or trusted elder. Okay, and it is a long-term office, which can be a benefit, by the way. So I'll come on to the whole republic business just below. The coronation oath is the oath that binds them to their responsibilities. Okay, and that has a history going way back, prior to Magna Carta 1215, right into the Saxon times and beyond. It's a common law thing. Okay, a limited monarchy, which is what we are, by the way. That's what we are, is a limited monarchy. Okay, we're also a democratic, common law, constitutional nation, if you want to think of it like that. We have a democratic constitution. Okay, not because of voting and elections, as I'll come on to later. So is a republic better than a limited monarchy because you have a short-term president? No, not necessarily, because keep in mind that once you disenfranchise government its power by having trial by jury, and the people effectively are governing themselves at that point. They are deciding on all matters of justice at that point. And so what you've done is you've taken out the power of what you thought of before as government, and they're not really government anymore. They're a governing administration, which is a bit different, isn't it? Because the government is now, with full common law trial by jury, is really the people. Okay, the people are governing themselves in that situation. Yeah. So essentially, it doesn't really make any difference at that point whether you're a republic with a president or a limited monarchy. It doesn't really make any difference at that point, except that I would say that the limited monarchy is probably better, because these long-term offices actually should be, in some ways, better. Why? Because they are separated to some extent, to a very large extent actually, from the short-term day-to-day interests of the politics of the country. Yeah. So a president is not really very different from any of the other politicians that are sitting in the lower house, really, in that situation. Yeah, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that's better. Well, not really, because they're aligned with parties and things like that. You don't really have the king or queen aligned with a political party. Yeah. And that was the whole point, by the way, of the long-term offices of the upper house, which are meant to be a next level break on the lower house of the legislature. Okay, so the point of the peers that inherited their position, the whole point of them was that they're not easily bribed in the same way. They're so out of the political factions that actually bribing them and giving them backhanders isn't really going to work. Yeah, and that was the whole point of the upper house and the barons or the lords. Yeah, that was really the whole point of them, is to be different from that, to be removed. Because, you know, in a sense, if you think about it, a long-term, you know, sort of family-based reputational concern is a serious thing. That's life, yeah, and beyond, yeah, multi-generational concern, that is, yeah. So people who in the upper house who inherit that role, that's quite a thing to carry on your shoulders. Yeah, so the thing to remember there is that the point of the aristocracy under our constitution is that the aristocracy very much understood that they were dependent upon the commoners, and the commoners were dependent upon the aristocracy. There was a synergistic relationship between them, which is often misunderstood. Why? Because of divide and rule and all that, and they're very good at that. Yeah. The class thing, right? I'm not saying that there aren't members of the aristocracy who are extremely arrogant and all the rest of it, but many of them aren't, by the way, and I know that anyway, firsthand, because there are many that are very caring and serious about the matters of the country. So, summary of our constitution, here it is very quickly. What does it break down into? 1, a natural law tribunal, giving us an equitable system. Okay, and the sovereignty of the people. That's how you gain the sovereignty of the people, by placing the people in charge of matters of justice. The people are the final arbiter of law, as was the case right back in the ancient Athenian constitution. Okay. 2, a system of legislation for flagging up concerns. It's just a guide in certain standards. Okay, that's all it is. They're basically meant to be a guide to bring people before court. Okay, and the third thing is that a wise elder who promises in perpetuity to hold all of this in place. And one of the things I forgot to mention is that the wise elder, or the head of state, ultimately has the decision to ratify legislation or not, and they have an obligation to use that power. Okay. Very quickly, a distorted rule of law. So how have things gone wrong? I've just painted the picture of how it's meant to work. How does it work actually in reality now? Okay, so we've got a gradual watering down of trial by jury. Okay, we've done that through disqualification to be on a jury. That happened a very long time ago. First time that happened, I think, was about the late 1400s. I think it was 1483. They passed some legislation that changed the meaning of the word freeman. Okay, and originally the word freeman actually was applied to any commoner, cotters, churls, villeins, you know, whoever, basically. And virtually everybody in the country could be on a jury. Okay, later on they altered that and they filtered it down to only those who were land owners. Different thing, okay? So that was one of the ways. The new role of the convener, the judge, all about directing the jury. You can see how that's gone wrong. The education of the jury of their power and right. Okay, now there's an organization in America called FIJA, Fully Informed Jury Association. But there isn't really over here an equivalent organization. Well, it's probably me, actually. It's probably my website, commonlawconstitution.org. That's really the only organization that, apart from Ken Dudney's Democracy Defined, okay, it's the only organization that's been teaching people absolutely clearly that they have the power to annul legislation, or at least to judge independently. Okay, as far as I'm aware, there isn't really any other website up there that's teaching people specifically that central point. Okay, but anyway, there it is. But FIJA in America is a key organization that does that, and that's an important thing that we need to be doing. So the gaslighting and obfuscation, because there's a lot of that going on. The gaslighting of the nation over trial by jury, because you'll notice that they kind of celebrate trial by jury on the one hand, and yet they also kind of dismiss it. And there was a couple of guys actually in 1980 who wrote a really good essay, Brown and Neal, and the quote from that is, "The empirical demise of the jury has been accomplished by stealth rather than by denigration or frontal attack. Paradoxically, this has been accomplished by constant affirmation of its significance. On the one hand, we love it. It's fantastic trial by jury. It's the great English tradition of our law, yes? And on the other hand, no, we're not going to allow juries to judge on justice, all matters of justice. They have to be told by the judge what, sorry, which is it, So we got this kind of stuff going on all the time, okay? And I would suggest to you, by the way, that a lot of this is to do with fear within the system. It's not what a lot of people are claiming, which is that all judges know what's going on and it's all a conspiracy. No, that's actually a very immature characterization of the situation. And I'm trying to combat that, actually. Probably what it really is that the judges are in fear. They sort of know in the back of their heads that actually the people should be the final arbiter of law. But can we really do it? Can we really let them do it? Are they conscious enough to allow them, or are we going to get chaos? Now, do you think they're right or wrong? I don't know, because they might be right, because our society is not very conscious, actually, right? So this is the problem that we're in, okay? But we have to prove as a society that we're up for that challenge, that we want to be responsible. And this is the key point about trial by jury, is that trial by jury has the seeds within it to allow us to become more conscious. Why? Because we are exercising our conscience. Yeah, and it's in the jury that you face your biases and your prejudices. And that's why it's so important that the Constitution is enacted. It's why it's important that we have trial by jury operating as it should, because that's the thing that keeps the community conscious. And I've described trial by jury as society's shadow workshop, because on a jury, you're actually doing quite a lot of shadow work. You're doing a lot of self-reflection. It actually affects yourself, and it affects the people around in the court and in society. Magistrates' court. Right, the kinds of court. At the moment, we have, I'll come on to that in a minute. So the kinds of court. We have a magistrates' court, we have a crown court, we have appeal courts. Okay, the Supreme Court is the top one, the Court of Appeal, the High Court. Okay, only 1% actually of cases reach a jury. That's how bad the situation is right now. 1%. Okay, there are all sorts of reasons for that. It's not just the fact that they're blocking it. It's partly that. It's not only that. Okay. Offences that are dealt with, first of all, usually in the magistrates' court, they come through the magistrates' court to decide where they're going to go next. Okay. Summary offences remain in the magistrates' court. Okay, it's where they've decided that offences that are summary only will stay in the magistrate's court. Some offences are known as either way offences, which means that you get to elect, or in fact, actually, interestingly, it's consent to summary judgment. So they're actually saying, do you consent to summary judgment in that situation? Yeah, interesting. Okay. I'm hearing all sorts of stories about people who think that they're managing to get jury trials beyond a summary offence only in the magistrate's court. I'm not sure that I believe it yet. I'm hearing a lot of bold claims. Usually, often, it's down to the fact that they haven't quite understood. So, for example, in low-level theft, for example, they've gone and confused things even further by saying, well, it's not an either way. We're going to change it from being an either way to a summary only, but we're going to put a little provision in there to allow you to take it to trial by jury if you want it. Okay, so there's all kinds of little things in the system that actually allow that to happen anyway. Okay, and sometimes what I think might be happening, if anybody is having any perceived success, it's actually just that you're saying to the court, I demand belligerently my trial by jury. And in fact, they're just going, okay, fine, we're going to offer it anyway, kind of thing. So sometimes there's confusion, okay, about this. But generally speaking, people within the legal system are not, they're not taking things onto it because they know that that's the way the system doesn't work like that. Okay. And if we want to educate them, we have to, come out with the arguments that constitutionally, Article 39 provides us with that right to trial by jury in every situation. Now, it's not always one-sided like that. The magistrate's court, by the way, the magistrates judge on all aspects of the case, interestingly. And they would claim that the magistrates, which, by the way, are not employees of government, they are actually members of the public. Okay, but they argue that they are our peers. And that's one of the problems that we've got. They're not randomly selected, of course, because they go for that position. Anyone can, well, not everyone can be a magistrate, but if you're particularly interested, you can become a magistrate. I have seriously thought about it because I thought it would be quite interesting for me to be a magistrate. But then I thought, no, I really can't do that. But one of the interesting things about the magistrates is that they do get to judge on all four aspects of the case. And in that respect, that's better than our current trial by jury. Just thought I'd throw it out there. Evidence being heard. Now, that's an interesting one. I'm just pulling things around here. The magistrates get to hear the evidence, even though they have to do some mental acrobatics when they're told that has to be not admissible. So they've heard the evidence, but they have to say, no, I can't think about that evidence, and have to, But a jury doesn't get to hear all the evidence. So a judge can filter that. Yeah, and sometimes there's a good argument for that, by the way. That's not an easy one, that. Okay, we can get into that under natural law. And the biggest problem is that the magistrates' court is a protection filter against annulment. And some of the legislation that is most in need of being annulled or being filtered and checked by the consciences of the people are the summary-only offences. You've guessed it. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Legislature, limitations. Parliament has the power to alter or repeal any legislation. And they present it like that as if that's a really powerful thing. It's not. It's their legislation. They get to alter or repeal that as they like. Okay? But the point of that is this, that legislation lacks the long-term power that constitutional law has. Okay, so they try and frame it as, oh, Parliament has all the power that they could possibly want to do anything they like with law. No, they get to change legislation because they don't understand and recognize that constitutional law is higher than legislation. Okay. Now, they've invented something quite recently called constitutional statutes, which is an absolute illusion, by the way. They don't really exist. Okay, it's a creation of the political class. This, okay. Actually, I've put this. That's referring to something else. That the elevation of the political class happened between the 1600s and the 1700s. Okay, but what I'm saying here is that constitutional statutes are a thing that they've invented quite recently within the last few decades, and it's mainly connected with European law, to do with the idea that they make their own statutes a little bit more sticky, and it's to do with the idea of the fact that when you create, if you have statute A and statute B is introduced, and if it encroaches on statute A, it will automatically repeal the earlier one to the extent that it encroaches on it. What they've basically done with constitutional statutes is to have a statute in place that where that effect doesn't happen. Okay, but they can still explicitly repeal or amend a statute that is constitutional. So it's complete rubbish. Okay, it's a bit of an illusion. I can explain that if anyone wants to know that. Okay, then I can explain it a bit more. But examples of constitutional statutes, as they call them, Bill of Rights, 1689. Okay, was pretty dodgy. A lot of people think, oh, it's a great piece of writing. It sounds good in places, but it actually contradicts itself, and it also upholds the disenfranchising of most of the people of the country, by the way, on trial by jury. It was a big problem. Okay, Bill of Rights is not your friend, and it's not constitutional law. It's a statute. It's a piece of legislation. Okay, there's a lot of misinformation put out there about that. Similarly, the Coronation Oath Act, 1688. Anything that's an act is a piece of legislation coming from government. Okay, it's not constitutional law. Okay, so sometimes they're really useful because they give you pointers as to the fact that they agree with constitutional law, but they themselves are not the foundation of constitutional law. They can't be, ever. Okay, under any circumstances. I won't go into defenses because I haven't got the time. Further things to point out: collectivism and groupthink. Be very careful with this, because if you are talking about trial by jury and individual rights and natural rights, then you are an individualist. You are not a collectivist. Okay, if you are a collectivist, then you are in agreement with statism, and statism is all about forcing taxes so that you can deliver services. Be very careful, because I noticed on your website about the fact that you think that there's a right to provide one or two things in that list. Okay, if you're going to have to pay for that through taxation, you can't do that because you're contradicting yourself. Okay, remember that taxation is would not be something that you could have under an individualist society. So what is democracy? Democracy, what is it really? It's the existence of a natural law tribunal that places the people over their own governing administration in authority, always on matters of justice. It makes the people the final arbiter of law. Okay, what is the problem with order following? We learnt this in Nuremberg. Order following is always bad news. Okay, and there are three types of order following going on in our society. One is the people following legislation. Why do you follow legislation? Because through fear of punishment. That's order following. It's never virtuous to follow orders, ever. Because what you're doing is you're suspending your moral faculties. Okay, law is all about moral principle. Okay, it's not about following orders. Yeah. The second thing is that the jury are following the orders of the judge. Not good. And the third thing, kind of orders that are going on, is the police and the military, and they're obviously following orders. Okay, three types of order following going on. Never good, and it's fundamentally against natural law. And when you're following orders, there's an inner trauma and shame that is occurring because it's contrary to your conscience. Often, not necessarily always, but often it is. Yeah. A summary: why our constitution can help us. Very quickly, I've talked about individualism and collectivism, but basically what it is clarifying for us that we should be individualists. Yeah, under natural law requires us to be individualists. Okay, that doesn't mean to say that we're selfish. It means that when you talk about a group, you come together as a group, but you always do it voluntary, under voluntary action. Yeah, and what that's doing is elevating the rights of the individual to decide for themselves whether they want to be part of that group. Yeah, so it's voluntary action, always. Okay, so another way of saying it is that system of society you could call voluntarism. Okay, the opposite of that is collectivism, which is where you're placing the group as the primary entity. The group's rights overrides the individual. Well, a group can't have rights because it doesn't exist in reality. Okay, it's a fiction. It's an abstract of the mind. Yeah. So natural law is all about the individual. Okay, groupthink is, so what have I said that for? Can't remember. Trial by jury is a customized approach to justice. Okay, whereas legislation is, I suppose you could describe as the off-the-peg solution. Why? Because it's been modeled in the future. You're trying to categorize human behavior into convenient boxes. You're trying to model it like a computer program, algorithmic. Yeah, you're trying to work out ahead of time, what are people going to do? They might do this. If they do that, they get that punishment. If they do that, they get that punishment. Yeah. Doesn't work like that. Natural law doesn't work like that. The universe doesn't operate like that. Everything is meant to be a customized approach because you can't tell intent like that. Remember, everything is about intent. And of course, it allows for the transformation of our consciousness through trial by jury. Trial by jury assists us in the transformation of our consciousness because it allows us to exercise that our consciences. Yeah. The other thing, just mention quickly, that banking and the money system, which is acting fraudulently, and there are various usurious mechanisms going on in the banking system, which many of you will know. The fraud of money creation and mortgages, interest paid on money that they didn't lend, all of that kind of stuff, contracts, all that kind of thing. That is all unlawful according to the Constitution. So enacting the Constitution and pulling the Constitution into any kind of manifesto within a political system like this is going to underpin that as well. Absolutely outlaws any kind of usurious or fraudulent activity. Okay. Challenging the fraud, you might be able to use something like the Bradbury Pound, which Justin Walker is key on, and he will tell you all about Montague Norman and Helmer Schacht of Germany and what went on there in 1914. Very important if you don't know that. But the Bradbury Pound is a good sort of immediate mechanism to get you out of the problem. It's not an ongoing solution, I believe. Okay, it's because ultimately I don't believe you need money at all, by the way. I believe in the Michael Tellinger's contributionism principle, which is that we all ultimately do the jobs that we need to do. And by doing that, we end up with a massive abundance of energy. And so we don't even need to exchange stuff. It's just like you just do what you need to do. Help the person out on their computer problem. You know, go and give half an hour of your time to help this guy dig up his vegetables, whatever. In return, this lady's going to cook you lunch. I don't know, whatever. Yeah, I'm ultimately feeling that that's where we need to go. And by the way, if you're interested in that kind of thinking, Michael Tellinger, the contributionism, what was it originally called the Ubuntu concept, is really important. He calls it one small town now, but do look out for that because it's amazing. And if you're really interested in no money, another guy, Harold Katzfeller, is very interesting on this idea. Very quickly, if I want a haircut, I go to the hairdressers, and instead of paying him, he actually gives me a ticket or a note to say that I owe a debt or an obligation to society. Okay, in other words, the fact that I have this thing in my wallet means that I should go and do something for half an hour to go and help out. Yeah. So in other words, it inverts money around the other way. Really interesting. So you're not in debt, you're in credit. Yeah. Some really interesting ideas there. The benefits of our constitution: it keeps the people above their administration by placing limitations of power, resulting in an equitable society. I've said that. It precludes usurious financial banking practices, and it teaches the people how to be free by triggering a consciousness transformation. How do we proceed? Calling out public servants, preferably when you're not in trouble. There's a lot of people kind of like going up against the system by actually kind of landing themselves in trouble. I don't think that's very powerful. I think it's probably better where they can't pin anything on you at all, and then go after them in large enough numbers and saying, hang on, why are you doing this? Yeah, that's the way we probably should be doing it, really. Article 61 is one way, and because it creates a record, it's good. And a Trojan horse within the political system. okay, which is what you guys are all about, you know. So if you are going to involve yourself in the mess of politics, and all credit to you guys for getting stuck into that, take the Constitution in with you as a Trojan horse. But as I said to Lynn, by the way, if you're going to do this, brace yourself, because you will be attacked like you've never been attacked before. There are two things, by the way, that you will absolutely draw the establishment onto you. One is constitutional law and trial by jury, full common law trial by jury, and raising the secrets of jury independence and annulment by jury. That's one thing. The other thing is raising all the stuff about banking, fraudulent banking, and all of that. That's another subject that is going to draw flack in a massive way, by the way. So just be aware of that. The last thing I just wanted to say is this is less about fighting for our freedom and more about earning it. Okay, and that should have been proving we are responsible. There you go. Okay, because this, I think you'll have understood from my presentation that, you know, yes, there are conspirators behind the scenes. Of course there are. Yeah, but actually, would they succeed if we weren't as flipping gullible? If we were a little bit more critically thinking? If we were a bit more honest with ourselves about things, a bit less lazy? No, they wouldn't succeed. Yeah, and that's a much bigger part of this than people realize. Okay, and people don't like that because thinking about it's all to do with conspiracies and the people behind the scenes gives you a let-out clause. Okay, it gets you off the hook. Okay, it makes you think that you don't have to deal with your stuff and your aspect of responsibility. It means you don't have to go into your shadow and do that work. Yeah. We must begin our healing process. The transformational effect of trial by jury can help us achieve this. Okay, one very quick thing. The state and order following and authority is what we have at the moment. Most people in the world of the freedom movement think there's only one other solution to this, which is raw anarchy, no governing administration at all. So your anarchists typically will think of that, which is sort of the antithesis of the first thing. Yeah. But there is actually this in the middle, which is the organic nation, the democratic constitution, which acts as what you might describe as a safe container for our anarchic lifestyle. Okay, it's the lifestyle that we would be able to have under a properly functioning common law constitution is quite anarchic. It's not completely raw anarchy because you have to submit to the judgment of your peers, right? But the first thing that you do in life is that you self-govern. Okay, you know, because you have strong moral principles, what is right and what is wrong. You learn about right behavior under natural law and you self-govern. That's the first thing you do. The second line of defense is that you submit to the judgment of the people around you in your community. Yeah, and that is what this system is all about. The constitutional system is all about. Two places: www.commonlawconstitution.org, which is what I set up in January. It was actually really a sort of second wave of an already existing website, which was the British Constitution Group. It's really a replacement for that in a sense. And it's all about educating yourself about the limitations placed on our administrative government. And you've got news on there, events, resources, memes, essays and articles, and academic references. It's all on there, ladies and gentlemen. There's so much on there. And one of the first things that you hit, by the way, is 5 steps to understanding the Constitution. So everything that I've encapsulated within this talk is all in those 5 steps to understanding the Constitution. Have a look at it. Okay, there's loads of good stuff in there. And then lastly, if some of you are really interested in the more esoteric subjects, and if you want further material getting into consciousness and the nature of lies and truth and our relationship with that, then I would recommend this website, which is mine, called lawandalchemy.org, where you'll find thoughts, online learning, in-person courses, although I haven't got any at the moment up there, just at the moment, essays and articles, and what I'm doing public speaking wise. Okay, and in that, you will learn about natural law, human purpose, anarchy, shadow work, and the heroic journey, which is what learning about yourself is all about. It's quite painful, quite nasty stuff. That, by the way, that's hell, by the way. Hell is really looking at your own stuff and unraveling it. Okay, and that's where you really get love and light at the end of that. You don't get it any other way. You get it by looking at the dark stuff inside you, doing shadow work and integrating that, coming through it. Then you understand much more. You've raised your consciousness at that point. You can't raise your consciousness doing anything else, by the way. You have to understand natural law and the contrast. One other thing very quickly, I promised that I was going to talk about it right back at the beginning. I said that one of the key things, the way that you describe rights is do no harm, cause no loss, and act in honor. The one thing that's missing from that, ladies and gentlemen, is sitting on the sidelines and being silent when wrongdoing is being committed. That will bring massive karmic consequence under natural law, okay? And we do that a lot as a species. We remain silent, okay? By remaining silent, you are not standing in the defense of truth and honor and morality, okay? And remaining silent, the universe does not like that, I promise. Okay, that's it. Nice to talk to you guys. Any questions on anything you like? As long as it relates to this and not, I don't know, cooking or something. Or
First of all, can I just say thank you very much. Thank you for that very long talk. I mean, there are lots of things where I was thinking I could do with more. So maybe we just, when we've had a think about it and slept on it, we come up with more specific targets. But yeah, if I can just say thank you, William. And on behalf of everybody, if anyone wants to switch their cameras back on, and we'll open up to a little bit of Q&A.
No problem.
Preferably about what we've been talking about. So, I mean, I suppose the first thing is, how can we use the Constitution to protect ourselves right now? I mean, you're saying, I think you were probably saying we need to do the work on ourselves and take responsibility,
yeah.
And take back our power before we can actually start to make this common law and the Constitution work for us.
You're kind of doing two things at once. You're absolutely right, Lynn. It's kind of a chicken and egg situation. By enacting the Constitution, it helps us to become more conscious, right? So you're kind of doing this stuff at the same time. We've got to work on ourselves, and without working on ourselves, we're not going to see the desired transformation. I absolutely promise you that. It's not going to happen, because actually at best what will happen is that you do something to affect the establishment or the political class, you pull it apart, you create a bit of a bombshell about something or whatever it is. But ultimately the conditions that created the enslavement condition that we're in will come about again, unless the cause is really much deeper, right? So, you could push it back, you could create some situation that kind of takes us back 10, 15 years, and it actually gives us some breathing space and, whatever, by exposing some conspiracy or whatever it might be. Maybe, yeah. But long term, if we're really interested in the long term and we're going to grow up spiritually and emotionally and psychologically as a species, we have to look at natural law and we have to raise our consciousness. And given the fact that the Constitution actually helps us do that, and it's all part of the same bundle, that's pretty exciting. Yeah. So can you use the Constitution at the moment? You're not going to be able to do it magically to solve your immediate problem. But if we had thousands, hundreds of thousands of people supporting the re-establishment of these proper constitutional principles, it would get very embarrassing for the powers that be behind the scenes, and they would have to start putting things back in place. Okay, let me just say very quickly, I'm not in favor of some of these ideas in the freedom movement and in the common law movement of saying, right, let's put in a kind of parallel court system and set up our own common law courts. It's not going to work. Why is it not going to work? Because ultimately what's going to happen when you get to enforcement? How are you going to enforce it? How are you going to enforce the crimes of the people that you've tried in your common law court? What we should be doing is owning the system that is in place at the moment, because that's actually ours. the judiciary is meant to be ours. Yeah, it's not really meant to be a branch of government. It's actually meant to be separate from us. Yeah, and the people are meant to be judging matters of justice. And when you talk about phrasing, you use phrases in the context of with people in the establishment, like courts of conscience. They don't like it, you know. And there was an open day actually in the Crown Court in Winchester, and I went in to make a nuisance of myself, as you can imagine. And there were talks that I could go to, and I did go to one, and actually it was a magistrate. She was lovely actually, and I spoke to her just before she went in to speak, and I didn't want to unsettle her because she was speaking, and really nice lady, but she really fundamentally believed that she is one of the peers, because they're told that. The magistrates believe they are the peers. Okay, and so I had to give her a few home truths, and I asked a slightly awkward question in the Q&A session of her talk afterwards. But what was most interesting actually was that I was going around the queues at stands and various things, and I went to the magistrates stand, you know, where if you want to become a magistrate, you can, you know, they had a stand there, and I started chatting with some of the magistrates in that organization all about this, and they were really interested actually. Yeah, when they're not interested is when you start making crazy claims like, you know, oh, we went into court the other day and we did this, and this, and we used this language, and the judge ran out because he was terrified. Give me a break. That is not recognized generally within the system. And I know that because I'm in contact with legal professionals who are awake, by the way. Okay, there are one or two fully awake members of the legal profession. Okay, and I'm in touch with one of them all the time. And I discuss this. And the one thing that individual says is that in my career, and by the way, that person isn't practicing in the legal profession at the moment. But the one thing that they say is that none of this stuff about secret languages, the straw man theory, all of that, not understood, not known about at all. And I don't think it really exists. And I wonder whether this is an example of where the freedom movement has added 2 and 2 and got 5. I know all about the straw man stuff. I've been down all of those rabbit holes and I know about it. But I'm saying, don't go there. Use the constitutional arguments, because we are making ourselves look like a bunch of clowns.
I sort of think that you're right there, that if I wonder if it's one of those mischievous things that's put in to divide.
Yes, that's what we were talking about the other night, actually.
One of the things that you know, it's a bit like a lot of things, isn't it? Yeah. Whether, you know, they're poisoning us with chemtrails or whatever, there's enough truth somewhere for something for it to be a little bit believable. I mean, yes. I personally don't think we're being poisoned. I think there's trails happening because I see them, but the plant life looks verdant enough to me for me to not worry about poisoning. I know, this is the thing, isn't it? It's you just wonder, and I think there's always that tiny grain of believability and truth, and but I do think there's a lot of counter conspiracy theories put out to confuse and distract, take us away from what we really need to be doing, which is the work on ourselves and our communities and bringing ourselves back to doing things for ourselves. Anyway, couldn't agree more. Totally. And you're right. And in doing that, it actually makes us look less credible and a bit silly, so that when we actually do have a point about something, it's not as easy to make that point. That's that conspiracy theory lot again. Yeah.
Lynn, could we now go to having everybody on view? And
yes, William, can we get rid of your
yeah, let's get rid of that. Hang on a second.
I'd like to bring Conrad in, who's been waiting patiently with his hand up, and then
there we go.
But also, William, you know, when you mention gaslighting, some people like me don't exactly know what that means. So explain what it means as you say in it each time you say it, please.
Yeah, sure.
Need to have it reinforced. So Conrad, thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Hello, William, and thank you so much for your talk. You spoke about you spoke about silence just now, and by being silent, I can't remember exactly what you said about that, but I'm looking at this being silent, and therefore by being silent, one consents. Where does that silent comes from? and the fact that by being silent, they or the courts or the whatever it is you want to call it, say that by being silent, you're therefore consenting.
Yeah. Okay.
Is
So,
that their rule? Or
yeah, no, that is a that is a principle in maritime type laws and admiralty type laws. This idea that okay, I'll give you an extreme example. Okay, so the idea that I put a note through your letterbox, Conrad, and say that everything in all assets that you have are actually mine, and you've got 2 weeks to hand them over to me, and I become the owner of all your assets. If you were not to respond to that, I could, the most ridiculous thing is that I then claim, well, I didn't get anything back from you to say that that wasn't the case. You didn't counterclaim, so you need to hand over all your assets to me. That's kind of the most absurd. Now under our common law system and under our conventional system of law, that is not quite the case. Okay, because clearly there's a trial by jury in between. Yeah, it would make sense in that situation that a trial by jury would come, before. And why didn't you respond to that claim? Well, there are all sorts of reasons why you might have a claim. Because you thought I was a nutter, because you thought I was just some random person just coming past your house and making ridiculous claims. There are all sorts of reasons why that could be the case. Yeah. So our common law based system and our conventional law doesn't see it quite like that. So the problem that the freedom movement is getting itself into is that they're convinced that everything functions like admiralty and uniform commercial code, and so therefore this whole idea that you can you can make a statement, or they can make a statement about us, and if we don't respond, then there's a contract that's formed, etc. Now, whether that's going on in their system secretly behind the scenes mirrored, frankly, I'm not that interested. Why? Because it's not a legitimate system anyway, right? I often say to people, okay, so if they're playing games in the admiralty courts with you, do you think that what they are doing is legitimate? And did they tell you that that's the way the court system works? Are they open and transparent about it? And everybody naturally answers no, of course not. So if it's not lawful under our constitution, then why are you giving it energy? Yeah, why are you going into their system, into their illegitimate court system, playing them at their own game? Because all the time that you're doing that, what you're not doing over here is calling them out, which is what I was saying earlier about not being silent. It's the calling out wrongdoing that's the key. Yeah. So when I see something, if I'm sitting on the sidelines and I see somebody actually harming somebody else or doing something that is, or lying or whatever it is, I'll probably call it out. Because actually, hang on, even if I like that person and I'm friends with them, you've got to be honest. Yeah. So one of the problems in society, going into the consciousness aspect of it, is that the nicest people in society are the most dangerous. Now, that's quite a claim, but what do I mean by that? It's the nicest people are the people who are always prepared to brush things under the carpet. I've jotted these phrases down. Agree to disagree, not a good thing to do, by the way. Going along to get along. Yeah. Being over conciliatory, because you're not being authentic and you're not having it out. And natural law requires us to deal with contrast, yeah, and to get to the bottom of things. It wants us to do it in an adult way, yes, and to debate and to get to the bottom of problems, okay. But it's basically about resolution, yeah. Now, the nicest people in society are the ones that aren't authentic, because you can't be authentic just by going through life just being nice all the time. It's not about niceness; it's about being moral and standing for principle. Yeah. So standing for principle is calling it out when it needs to be. Yeah. It's a bit of a rant, wasn't it, that?
Yeah.
that was great. Thank you very much indeed. I do have another question, but maybe somebody else has one. I'll keep quiet for a moment.
Conrad, if you just put your hand up now, and then we'll go to Simon, because he's had his hand up for a little while.
Of course.
And we did have some other questions, but the people have left, and so hopefully either their questions were answered, or they'll come back to you through different contacts. So Simon.
Hi, William.
Hi.
I wish I'd started to listen a lot more intently from the beginning. I was trying to multitask, which was a mistake, because you got very, very interesting, especially towards the end when you started to talk about the way through the middle. But you used the phrase a couple of times, what you guys are doing. If you were trying to communicate this, what you're talking about, to an electorate, I mean, that's what we're all about here. We want to put up candidates.
Yes.
People will vote for.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is a journey, and people are a long way behind your curve.
Yes.
So how do you communicate? You know, we've got maybe a year to put a message together that resonates with people.
Yeah.
Will stop them voting for the same old, same old. So I don't
Sure.
know, any suggestions on how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be different levels that different people are going to resonate with, and clearly, what I was giving you was a little bit of a selection of information, a range of information, and we could go much deeper into any of the stuff that we dealt with. Not now, but you know, at any point, there's far more to that. You know, natural law. I mean, if you really want to learn about natural law, which is the deeper aspects of it, I suggest you go to YouTube and go and search for Mark Passio, Passio, and search for his presentation on natural law. But I'll warn you now, it's 8.5 hours long. It was a whole weekend presentation. Probably best not to do that in one lump. But do look at that. That's the deeper stuff. But in answer to your question, the most surface level stuff is that if it's really all about sovereignty of the people. You know, most people think, I do it this way, okay? How I say to people, what is the way in which you think the people have influence over their own government? And most people think, well, it's to do with voting in elections. Okay, well, what if I told you that it was nothing to do with that? And in fact, the way it's supposed to work is something completely different. And then you tell them that actually the people are meant to be in charge of legislation every single day, all over the country, and they have the power to throw out legislation that is not just. Now, I know we've got a challenge in getting that back in place, but that's your job. But what I'm saying is that if you bury that in the heart of a political manifesto, to say that you're going to return that, you're going to return the people's genuine sovereignty by bringing up the questions of constitutional law, by debating constitutional law. Now, one of the things that I would point you to generally as an organization is towards democracydefined.org. Now, Ken Dudney, who I've learned an awful lot from. Now, one of the things I will warn you about Ken is a fascinating chap. He can start an argument in any room, but he's a great guy. He's had lots of arguments with me about all sorts of interesting things, and we've agreed on practically everything when it comes down to constitutional law. Okay, so the aspects of constitutional law, it really checks out. The work that he has done has been fantastic. Where we disagree is on things outside constitutional law, towards the deeper subjects, to do with natural law, to do with consciousness. Okay, so we have disagreements on that. But one of the things that I would point you to in his work is the Restoration Amendment, because he has always been about, and by the way, if any of you have got his book, Democracy Defined, The Manifesto, the book, The Manifesto, that's the clue as to what he's about. He's really all about getting constitutional law back into the political space using independence. So when an independent is running, it's really all about making sure that the Constitution is placed front and center as part of that manifesto. Whether or not you want to do that, that's up to you. But his Restoration Amendment is all about that. And I did say the last time I emailed him, I said I knew I was talking to you, and I will point you guys in his direction. But that's definitely something that you should look at. But if you were to get outside the subject of constitutional law, you might find that you're falling in, getting into disagreements and things. But he won't generally speak to you. He will only communicate by email. But I think it's something that you should probably do. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Can we have Conrad's question?
Oh, yes. Regarding Joinder, I'm reluctant to reply to anything that comes through actually another's letterbox, but because I don't have a letterbox because I live in a caravan in my woodland.
Very wise.
But yes, when it comes to Joinder, I'm very reluctant to reply to anything. And this is not about remaining silent, but the fact that I don't want to actually talk to these people at all because I don't think they are valid. They're not. Well, I'm losing all my words. It's the candlelight. It does this to me.
I know where you're going with that.
So basically, with Joinder, okay, good. Please take it up, William.
So the business to do with Joinder, though, is very much to do with maritime and admiralty law. It's this idea of contracting and all the rest of it. Yeah. So, right. So I'm very much in the space of interacting with the system, if I have to, on the basis that what they portray on the surface is what they genuinely mean. And I will treat them as that in honor. Perhaps knowing at some point, or knowing behind the scenes that there might or there might not be some other games going on. But the point I'm making is that you don't have to worry about their games in their system. What we should be doing is holding them to account under the Constitution openly within our conventional system. Yeah, makes sense. So in other words, it's all about plain English on the surface and being honourable. It's not about what they might or might not be doing in terms of playing games with some kind of secret system that they've put into place non-transparently. Does that make sense?
Great. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, having said that, how much do you actually want to communicate with them in order to encourage them to know where you are and all the rest of it? And I get that, and that's always a difficult balance to strike. And I get that. And by the way, I've lived in a caravan for a year, traveling all around the southwest, and the most difficult thing I had was the whole business to do with addresses. It's a flipping nightmare. That's just because the system doesn't like it, But I don't
Absolutely.
tend to worry about the Joinder aspect of it and the admiralty aspect of it. I just tend to, I treat them as if they're being honourable, and if they're not, then we'll get to that point, and then we'll hold them to account under constitutional law.
Great. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have Yogi?
Yogi, how are you?
Hi, Will. How you doing?
I'm all right. It's been a while, so I haven't been in contact with you. Sorry.
No worries. That's okay. So yeah, just regarding Joinder, kind of funny point there. I received a what do you call it? A Metropolitan Police speeding thing a few days back.
Yeah.
On a 20-mile-an-hour zone on Park Lane. So obviously you fill out the form, where you drive in the car, blah blah blah, all the rest of it. So this is it, obviously I'm in a vulnerable position in the sense that I don't feel like I can challenge it really, it's like I fill out the form, send it off, don't bother arguing too much, if it means a fine or going to do your, seminar with the, driving instructor or
your
something.
Speeding course.
Course.
How to speed.
That's it, yeah. So I just go and do that. It's just, I guess, a simpler option rather than trying to challenge and probably get my knuckles back with something else.
It's a really difficult one, because, and it happened to me, by the way, just recently. And I ended up doing a speed awareness course, not how to speed. And it was actually brilliant. It was actually a really good course. And I remember talking to Suk about this, actually, who's been on the circuit talking about constitutional law quite a lot. And he said, probably should be a requirement of everybody who's on the road.
I probably wouldn't have an issue with it, except for that road used to be a 40-mile-an-hour road, like you know, 2 years ago or whatever it was, before all the nonsense with the 20-mile-an-hour zone started.
Yes, totally get it. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. And this is the nature of the problem that we've got at the moment. You know, in essence, generally, I mean, in my case, I came into a village in Dorset, and I came in too fast. I was just not really thinking probably, and I came in at, you know, 35, 40 or something when it should have been 30 or something. And in my case, you know, was I committing a crime? Okay. And the debate in that would be, well, when you step inside a vehicle, what you're doing is you're raising the danger level to the people around you. And when you're raising the danger level, what's supposed to happen as that danger level goes up, your level of care should be going up as well. So this is a very interesting question about mens rea at that point, because you're not committing mens rea in the classic sense by saying, well, I actually intended to hurt that person. Well, you didn't hurt anyone, actually. All you did was break a rule. But what you did do, in theory, according to them, is that you raised the danger level to the people of the community around you. That, you know, that could be the argument on the other side. So this is actually a very difficult area, because actually under constitutional law, we've never had a situation where, you know, the entire bloody population is driving around absolutely lethal weapons at potentially 70 miles an hour on the fastest roads and probably faster. And, you know, we've never had that under a properly functioning constitutional law. So the roads is a real issue. It's actually quite a problem. And yeah, I've had lots of discussions with my legal profession friends over this one, and it's quite tricky.
And same with parking, I guess, as well. You know, like you couldn't have trial by jury for every single parking ticket if there's
no, and also
tickets.
Parking is not is somewhat different, isn't it? Anyway, because
so it's a slap on the wrist or whatever you know, call it, to stop people doing annoying things. But with the, like for the example, the 20-mile-an-hour zone, obviously that's all kind of not to do with safety. That's more to do with all this green agenda and all the nonsense.
I know. Yeah, I know, it's a massive can of worms, definitely. And I'm not saying that, you know, I don't necessarily think that that's the place to start anyway. I just don't think, you know, that if we're going to talk about, I'm not dismissing the problem, because I think it is a problem, but in your situation like mine, I just went ahead and did the normal thing under conventional law.
Yeah.
But if we're going to make a big thing about constitutional law generally, that wouldn't be the place or the area in which we would start doing it, because it's potentially sticky anyway. But it's a good point. You raise a good point, definitely. Yeah. Yeah,
and the constitutional law aspect is the fact that we can't challenge government for anything. That's the problem with the courts, really.
Yep.
Either it's council tax or, you know, whatever is illegal or unlawful or whatever happens to be the case, whether it's jabbing the kids or whatever it might be the case.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the, obviously we can talk at some point about the flyer, which is ready.
Yeah, I think I spotted you sent me an email today, actually. So
that's right,
yeah, no problem. Yeah.
So that's ready. So
I'll have a look.
You talk about that. And I put democracy defined on it as well. So I'll put that on it as well.
Fantastic.
So makes more sense. Okay, great. Thanks.
So I suppose the obvious question. I was just going. I didn't bother raising my hand there, Julie. I'll just say this one. So if not driving, which I sort of agree is a relatively modern problem, where would you start? I mean, my big bugbear is secret courts, which I just think are, you know, utterly evil.
You talking about secret courts of family courts?
Yes, but I just think any justice should be seen to be done in public. And yes,
the family courts thing, I'll just address it on that issue quickly first, is a very tricky one, because, you know, the last thing you want actually is you know, family situations being, you know, being aired in their laundry being aired in public, you know, kind of thing. I mean, that's you know, and kids are involved and all the rest of it. So that's a problem. That's a tricky one. Now, if you go back to the way that our communities would originally have been anyway, well, first of all, are these problems likely to come up in the way that they do anyway? Because quite often the problems that led to the family issues that are likely to get into court might well have been resolved sooner in a more conscious society anyway. So in a sense, you can say that the psychological damage that's being done to us generation after generation after generation, that then causes the repeated patterns of behavior within our kids and all the rest of it, is largely caused by the society that we're in right now. So I kind of get it, but I suppose what I'm saying is that it's not quite as simple as that to say that all justice should be done openly, and it should be. So things like, criminal, civil cases, and by the way, all civil cases and fiscal cases as well, criminal, civil and fiscal cases should all be before a trial by jury under our constitution. And that should all be open, probably. But also you've got to be careful that with this admissibility of evidence thing, because we always assume, of course, in our modern sort of less conscious society, of the need for privacy with all of this kind of stuff. And so then that brings in things like previous convictions, and that becomes problematic as well. Should the jury know about previous convictions of somebody, or should they be given a fresh start? Yeah, that's a problem. And it's interesting, isn't it, that often in the court system, they keep that from juries. And you could say that's actually a good thing. Yeah, because that's actually bringing about better justice. So in other words, the justice system that we love to hate is actually in many ways doing things better than we think it is. That's often the way. There are many features of the justice system where they thought it through very carefully, and there are very good reasons for why they do it. I'm not saying that ultimately it's right, that it's the right solution, but it is problematic. There are subtle grey areas and problems along the way that many in the freedom movement have not thought about. Yeah. So it's like the case law, for example. A lot of people think that stare decisis, which is case law, that's precedent. So when you take a case back to court for appeal, and it's held in the appeals court, you get judged by a judge. Okay, now often the case law, and you can read a lot of the case law in Blackstone's Criminal Practice, massive, great, thick book. Some of it is very good. It's very carefully thought through and very well written. And the justice of it, the things that they thought about morally, and you think, actually, wow, these guys really have thought about this carefully. Okay, yeah. I'm not saying it's right that case law should exist, and it's not something to be owned by judges. All judgments really should be made by juries, but there has
I've lost him.
been, by the way, back then you would have been able to appeal to the king, for example. Yeah, so that's an issue. That's complicated too.
Yeah, I think you probably are right that it's about our system is simply not fit for an unconscious society. And when you raise the consciousness of a society, the justice system is obviously going to work much better. So in normal communities going throughout history, past convictions would be known.
Yes, absolutely. That was the point I was trying to make, was that everybody would know about your past convictions. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
But now, of course, and yeah, we're not in that situation where we know what's gone on before, or we and I agree that there's sometimes a case of give a dog a bad name, but
yes, yeah,
in the natural way of things, we would know. So can I go to Julie?
Yeah, my experience personally, and also with clients and various people in the community, is that this whole system actually stinks. Family law, social care is not what it should be, and a lot of stuff is contrived through the court system. And I was interested to hear your presentation about trial by jury and the way that you presented about the magistrates. And
right.
I know it sounded as though magistrates were people to be trusted, but my experience is that they're not people that necessarily are out there as a genuine part of our community. And I really feel we need to stop judging people in our community. We need much more proper transparency. And there's certain communities that are really judged, particularly from my experience in Mansfield. And we need to be out there with the people and not just making it part of the system. And once we've got proper transparency, then we won't have these people being able to adversely take over. And when you think of even healthcare, I mean, doctors and other people to do with healthcare used to be part of the community, and stuff would be shared. And now we've got it so secretive that nobody knows that other people have got the problems that they've got until it's really noticeable. And yet we could be there supporting people properly much earlier. And that's what I really feel is important. And
yes,
I'm much more on, well, what is consciousness? Consciousness is really that sense of knowing what is with the gut feeling, with the heart feeling, with the higher mind, not the ego mind, knowing what is right. And this is where we need to go, and get rid of all this paperwork and stuff and really go with what is right in this circumstance.
Yes, I would largely agree. The problem, though, you've got is that people don't really know what right behavior is. And right behavior is a far more complex and difficult problem for people to realize. You can see on the surface.
You look at our education system, and I'm a qualified teacher. I've taught from nursery to adults, and it absolutely stinks. We need to get kids out of prison-like schools. We need to get people properly learning in life, through life, mixed ages, stop all these ridiculous standardized assessments, etc., etc.
I remember them well.
Yeah,
like you, I was a teacher as well. I remember all of that, and that was longer ago. So that was like 20 years ago.
Yeah,
so now it's probably even worse, I should think. But I completely agree with you, totally.
Now they are taking our children, our young adults, away from our communities, taking them off to universities and things like that, which takes them away from their family, and also then you end up with during the holiday times, you haven't got any community where the students were. The whole of that absolutely stinks.
Julie, I totally agree with you. But what I will say is that this is less a whole range of people in the system doing it deliberately to cause harm, and more about people in the system on an unconscious trajectory doing what they think to be right. And it's partially habitual. It's partly doing what they think is best, but they don't really know because they're just doing their job. Much of the system operates like that, with people just in like automatic mode, not really.
And you do mention this to some extent, that it's when something's being put in place and people just follow those orders. And that's what we need to get beyond.
Yeah, because the lazy thinking, the unconscious thinking is to do what you've been told, or do what you think, or to perceive the people who are higher in rank than you as knowing what they're doing.
Well,
and that's
sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, this is an issue about trust as well, because, the trust has been kind of embedded into the system because, people have been given pensions, people have been given, better welfare or whatever over the last 60, 70 years. People have not been given
pensions because we've had the flipping pensions away from us.
Well, there's an element of like, compared to 100 years ago, it may
Teachers'
be
pensions
there's
aren't
been
bad.
progress. There's been progress, quote unquote, in that sense. So people have this perception of, the government looking after you.
Yes,
so
completely.
Anybody who's working in the system is also in that same mindset, like somebody above them knows something better. So what I was going to say to you, Will, was, well, you may say that it's like unconscious behavior by these people, but there is also some level of hierarchy, think tanks, and whatever else happening, which is pushing down an agenda, whether it's LGBT or trans agenda or pedophilia and all these things, which is not unconscious, but is being sold as a benefit or equality or whatever it is. And yes, it's unfortunate people aren't challenging it because they've been sold that the government is doing some good of some sort.
Completely agree. And when it lands in the ears of the people of the general public, and they do it, by the way, through council meetings and things like that, so the community agenda is all done like that as well, to bypass our democratic systems. But what is it actually doing? It's falling in the ears of the people generally at the bottom who are believing everything that they hear. And there's a lack of critical thinking.
Yeah, and so the point, yeah, and the other point was like on your kind of thoughts about case law and, you know, the precedents and basically all the thinking that people have gone through, which is valid and does have, you know, merit. The only thing is they don't apply it to when you want to challenge a government. That's what happens.
Oh, yes,
So
I know. Yes,
that's
exactly.
the thing. So,
yes,
you know,
I
it doesn't
know.
matter. They're happy for us to, you know, mingle amongst ourselves and sort out our problems. That's fine.
Totally.
You know, but it's like fine or whatever, right? It's like,
Yeah, no, you're right. No, there's a massive arrogance in the system as well. Totally. You're absolutely right.
Mhm.
And they can't point that perception at themselves, many of them, you know.
But they don't want to because they want to control the system, you know. So
Absolutely.
King,
Yeah, but not all of them.
King.
Some are in the know and know what's going on and know that it's an agenda, are aware that it's an agenda, but not many. I think quite a lot. They keep that from people and they just tell them other reasons as to why this is how we want to have it, not because we're actually going to gain control for ourselves and you're part of the club as well. They're not going to do that. Most of the people, fairly even quite high up, are actually just rolling out a plan because they've been told this is the best way. They've been given a whole sophisticated story as to why something is the best way to do it. I'm not in the business of just making loads and loads of excuses for everybody. I'm fully aware, okay, that the world is full of conspiracists, kind of, yeah. But what I've been through all of that in the years that I've been awake, and I'm absolutely aware of the level of evil that there is. But the number of people who are actually operating in that mode of thinking is far smaller, I think, than people in the freedom movement generally portray it as. It's much more about a trajectory. It's much more about a weight of screwed up thinking of too many people who are just prepared to go along with it and not enough self-examining. And if they were to self-examine a bit more, they would be able to think quickly, like, hang on, I'm just following orders at the moment. This authority that I see as authority actually isn't an authority at all. And I have a responsibility in my oath of office, with my oath of office and my in my office generally, I have a much higher responsibility. Now, they're not thinking like that, most of them.
Most of them, I think, there are people who do know that they should be acting with a high responsibility, but we have also the added wage and debt slavery.
Yes.
For quite a lot of people, especially during COVID, a lot of their actions were governed by the worry of losing their job, which would mean they lose their house, which is a massive, massive thing for most people. The security that the house gives people, gives their family, and they're not going to risk that. It's one of Maslow's very, very basic needs is shelter, and especially for the family. So I think that's been one of the. I think we can blame that on the very highest conspirators, like the top handful of bankers who have planned that by putting us into debt slavery. Nigel Lawson took off the ceiling in the 80s, and that made a lot of people, allowed a lot of people to borrow in a way that made them very vulnerable. Meant that they couldn't actually stand up and say no because it risked their job, and that was quite a clever move on their part, I would say. if you want to go
absolutely, and that in itself was just standing on the shoulders of Chatham House and Royal Institute for International Affairs and the Rhodes Society, and and the Fabian Society before that, and all of that, really, that whole going back really the generational.
Just a handful of people, I think, were the actual conspirators. Most of the bankers who made the decisions to loan would have thought they were being benevolent. I would have thought.
Yes.
Or
they would have been given extremely good reasons as to why they were being. Yes.
Within the rules, they'd done the due diligence to check these people could pay eventually, and they hadn't thought about the moral implications of enslaving someone in that way. So I think, again, it's probably a consciousness thing, isn't it? I mean, usury.
Yes, often it is.
Criminal offence for Christians, that we weren't allowed to do it for a long time. That was at one point an exclusively Jewish thing, that this lending of money, because it was an anti-Christian thing, we weren't allowed to.
It's not Jewish either, actually.
Not.
So no,
And as
No,
compared to-
absolutely against the Jewish books as well. It's
I know
yeah,
Sharia is also Sharia law also has that, doesn't it? That you
totally. Yeah.
not it's criminal to enslave someone with debt in that
Yeah.
way. Usury. I never say it properly because I've learned it
No, I
wrong.
mean, actually, you're right, Lynn. You know, if you were to take any of that banking stuff and talk about Richard Werner and the research that he's done on mortgage fraud, and if you were to sort of raise the temperature on all of that within the political system and then put that against the Constitution, that would get extremely bloody embarrassing. And it would really stir things up. That would.
Yes, because there was definitely something about, you know, that being illegal for a very long time. I'm not sure when it changed. You'd probably know, but
Well, it's still unlawful constitutionally. It might be made legal under legislation. Yes. Yeah.
so yes. Anyway, that's another argument. Right, Yogi, your hand's still up. Have you got something else?
Yeah,
to
I'll
say?
take it down. No worries. That's
Okay.
fine.
Well, I'm, you know, not that we couldn't discuss this for a long time, but you know, I'm just aware that it's now 9:30 and we've taken up a lot of people's evening. That's amazing. Thank you for sitting with that and listening to all this. And I think it's just telling me that it's a bit tip of the iceberg, isn't it? But the main message seems to be that, you know, we have to raise the consciousness for the Constitution to work, for us to be able to use.
You don't have to do that first. Yeah, so you can implement the Constitution as a practical solution as well, and raise the temperature in the political system as to why it's not working as it should, and putting it back in place to a varying degree will also have the effect of raising the consciousness at the same time. So it's a kind of at the same time thing, really.
So which is the bit of the Constitution that we can actually use? I mean, is it the bit, because I don't know what it says. I can't read it. I can't, you know, is it?
It's not that you're using it. It's the fact that I guess that you guys are raising the whole constitutional principles, the bedrock of the Constitution, as part of the manifesto of a political party. Yeah, bringing the Constitution back in so that the sovereignty of the people is there. And if you were running on that and you were telling people about trial by jury, the realities of trial by jury and how it's supposed to operate as part of the campaign, that would get embarrassing and tricky for the other side. Rachel's got a thumbs up for that one. There you go. So
is it that we, so okay, I don't know what the Constitution actually says, but is the way we use it the bit basically to say that the Constitution it says that the government can't override our natural law, common law rights? Is that the bit? Is that fundamentally what the Constitution is?
Yes, correct. So, which is why I've been saying to people that when they
our rights, that is anti-constitutional.
Yeah. So when people are challenging politicians on 15-minute cities or 20-minute cities or whatever, they always forget what minute cities they are. They shouldn't be making that a political argument like they normally do. What they should be doing is simply saying that you as a politician, even imagining the possibility of preventing my freedom of movement is unconstitutional. And the very fact that you're even entertaining the notion of doing something like that is possibly committing some kind of common law crime, probably misconduct in public office, which by the way is an imprisonable offence.
Yeah,
that's what we should be doing. Now, if you had thousands of people ringing up a local politician and saying, actually, you shouldn't be doing that, you're actually acting unlawfully. That's criminal, what you are doing as a public servant. You are imagining the curtailing of my freedoms under the Constitution. That's bad news. You shouldn't be in office doing that. Now, if you had lots of people having those conversations on the phone, ringing them up or going to see them, end of story. But it's a numbers game.
That's where the app comes into play, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah.
So anyway, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for discussing that with us, and hopefully we can we can call on you again if we, when we've digested and we know specifically.
It's a lot to digest, and if you want further, just in time, if you wanted clarification on that and as to how, it's only three principles of the Constitution: the common law tribunal, or the natural law tribunal. The people are in charge of justice. You have a legislature. It's fine for making legislation, but all legislation must be in alignment with common law, and it doesn't have the power to punish. And the third thing is that you have a head of state who promises in perpetuity to keep all of that in place and has the right to refuse royal assent to any legislation. That's it. That's the Constitution, what I've just given you there. It's 3 chunks, really. Easy.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, William. Thank you for so much of your time and for agreeing to talk to us and help us with our conference when we come to discuss this. So yeah, thank you very much. If we can all just say thank you to William there. Thank you. Okay.
It's a great pleasure, guys. I shall leave in case you've got other things to discuss, but thank you. It's been a great pleasure. Thanks a lot. And I shall dive on out of here.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All the best.
I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you.